Listeners, do you ever wonder if your memories are real? Or are you writing a memoir and struggling to remember something or worrying that what you're sharing might not be the truth? Today on Writing and Resilience, I'm joined by psychotherapist and neuroscience nerd Stacy Simmons for a powerful conversation about memory, trauma, and storytelling. We explore why memory isn't a recording device, how traumatic memories get fragmented in the brain, what reconstituted memories really are, and how writers can work with their memories in ways that heal rather than re traumatize. Get ready to dive into a conversation that reveals why memory is fragile, not like a flower, but like a bomb. Let's dive in. Welcome to Writing and Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Listeners, have you finished a first draft of your memoir but aren't sure what comes next? What if the secret to making your story resonate with readers isn't more pages, but instead a clearer question at the heart of your book? On February 25th, I'm teaching a live online class with Jane Friedman called Identify Your Memoir's Essential Question. In 90 minutes, you'll learn how the right essential question can shape your story, give your book purpose, and help you decide what truly belongs on the page and what doesn't. Whether you're stuck in the messy middle or polishing for submission, this class gives you a repeatable process to revise more confidently and start seeing your memoir through a fresh lens. Join me, Lisa Cooper Ellison, on February 25th at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time to unlock your memoir's central question. Register today by going to janefriedman.com. Well, hello, Stacey. Welcome back to the Writing and Resilience podcast. I am so excited about today's conversation.
I am so thrilled to be here, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me back. It's truly an honor. I love talking to you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Feelings mutual, and I'm just going to give a quick plug to your book, The Queen's Path, because writers, if you do not have a copy, I'm telling you, it is going to change how you think about your writing and about how you think about your story and your life. So if you want to know more about that, we already had an episode on it, so I will link that in the show notes so you can listen. But today we are going to talk about another issue that is really important to you if you are writing a memoir, and that is the issue of memory. Before we get started, I want to give you a chance just to let everyone know a little about yourself, and then we will dive into the questions.
So I am a psychotherapist, but I'm also a big neuroscience nerd. I am a psychotherapist trained at the Pacific Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California. And I am a certified psychedelic therapist. So I work a lot with people who want to use psychedelics for a therapeutic purpose. And there are only a handful of certifications in the country. I was part of the first cohort of the Integrated Psychiatry Institute's version. I am on the research team in the Integrated Psychiatry unit at UCLA and part of the research team at the Trance Science Research Institute in Paris, France. So those are my neuroscience bona fides. I am not a trained neuroscientist myself, but I love neuroscience and I do a lot of research that intersects with neuroscience. I know probably a little bit more than your average therapist.
Which is why we are all in for a treat today. And I will say, I felt like you infused some of that into the Queen's Path. I mean, that's not hardcore research, but I felt it.
Thanks. I do have a more hardcore research book in this one, my mushroom book.
Yes.
So this one's like the nerdy version of me. Like it reads very, very different. You kind of get the geek girl coming out for sure, like with all the acronyms and the and the science talk. So
And we're going to dive into that in another episode. So, listeners, stay tuned for that conversation. But today we are going to dive into memory. And I'm going to tell you, Stacy, this is a huge issue for so many memoirists because there are different kinds of memories that we're navigating. And I think you're going to be the one to really speak to this because you're the expert. But, it's like when you start remembering, you remember more, right? You start going down that rabbit hole. And then at the same time, you begin to think about or realize, oh my gosh, maybe I didn't remember this as accurately as I thought I did. Or why doesn't my memory line up with this other person's memory? There's so many nuances to it that trip writers up and then make them feel like they can't trust their own story. So, my hope today is that we can debunk, demystify, explain some of these things so that people can feel good about their stories, understand what's happening to their memories, and then think about how to use them in a way that is effective. So, to begin, we're going to talk about the types of memory that might be important to storytelling. And so, the one that I'm thinking of is episodic memory. That's the one that I find I work with the most. But when you think about memories, what are the types of memories that feel most important for all of us to understand, especially if we are navigating our stories?
It's a hard question to answer because episodic memory in and of itself, as human beings and especially as writers, we like to think of ourselves as caring about the truth, as caring about accuracy, right? And so I find that writers especially treat memory as though it's supposed to be capturable, like you're supposed to be able to have an objective truth that you're reporting on. And memory doesn't work like that at all. There's no objective memory. So even when we're talking about the experience of memory and the way it works in your brain, it doesn't work like a computer. So science has always treated our brain in whatever capacity the most elevated scientific metaphor is at the time. So when you go back and you read science from 1,000 years ago, they were just figuring out pneumatic machinery. And so they knew that they had to have liquids in those pneumatic machines in order to get the machines to work. So they used oil and they used water and they used all kinds of different compounds. And so when they thought about the brain, they thought about the pneumatic machinery or the body. They thought about like you have black bile, you have yellow bile, you have red bile, like things that they were like, okay, this is how the body works. It works off of these pneumatic concepts because that was the highest metaphor they had at the time. Same thing when we got into industrialization. The idea was like Frankenstein. You can put the body back together, give it a little electricity, and boom, you have a creation, right? That was the highest version of science. And so that's how we metaphorized our understanding. And each one of these metaphors has helped us understand ourselves better. And now we use computers. And so people think of the brain like it's a computer, like it has a file and the file goes into storage and then the storage is retrieved. But that's not how memory works. It's closer. We're still closer with that metaphor than what it is, but it's not 100%. Talking about the way that we think about science and computers now have really informed how we think about the brain and our bodies. The nervous system and the brain, there's not a separation between mind and body. It's all neurons in your body are the same kind of stuff as the neurons in your brain. Now, they all have different functions, they do different things, but it's the same kind of structure. So when we start talking about how to think about memory, I want to encourage people first and foremost to not think that your version has to be the absolute truth.
Yep.
Your version gets to be your version. And if you are a writer and you're telling your own story, it's fine if you want to hear from other people what they recall, how they think about things, but your version is going to be charged, and that's part of how your brain works with memory, by your experience. I'm like trying to avoid getting into like the post-anterior cingulate is sitting right next to the parietal lobes, but that's true. I mean, the part that it navigates most of the narrative memory sits right next to the part of your brain where all of your emotions are regulated. And so your emotions become part of the dance of creating memory. And when that happens, the memory gets a flavor, if you will. Like it's kind of like, if you marinated it right in juice or in wine or something, the memory and the emotion that goes with the memory are kind of fused. And it matters where the memory gets stored, how it gets stored, and what quality it's given for the future when you retrieve it. Or if you don't retrieve it, if it just stays in the unconscious. But that, to me, that's one of the most important things for people to allow. It's not even understand, it's allow. Like your version of something is still true. Now, whether it matches all the other versions, whole different story. Several years ago, there was a lot of research into memory because they found that memory is so suggestible that now eyewitness testimony doesn't have the same weight in court as it used to, because it is not hard to change someone's memory of an event by leading them with questions that, even if you're not intentionally trying to lead them, you can repeat something often enough and it'll change the image that your brain creates of the event. And the way they tested this was they looked at police interrogations of witnesses and said, okay, so when you saw the car, what were you doing? Like, I was standing in the corner, I saw the car come in, I saw it hit the pedestrian. Okay, so you were standing on the corner and you saw the car come in, and when that red car came down the street, what did you think? Right? They didn't say it was a red car. The interrogator said it was a red car. Whether it was true or not, there's now a red car.
Yes.
And that gets placed in, and the more you place it in, okay, so I saw the red car. Okay, so when I saw the red car, then I saw the man jump out of the way, but he swerved, and then the red car sped away. And the person will remember it that way forever because it's reinforced with the emotion of being interrogated, with the emotion of having witnessed something terrible, with the emotion of being seen and having somebody have a value in what they're reporting. Like, all of these pieces go into the experience of memory. And so while I want to encourage people to not treat their own memories like they're gospel facts, I also want them to allow that their memory gets to be their memory. If you're worried about writing a memoir and you're worried your Aunt Sally's going to hate it because you said something bad about her, too bad. Like, it's your memory. You're entitled to it. You've got your own version, and it's fine that you have your own version. It doesn't have to be computer generated.
What I love is that you're sharing many things that I've been teaching for a long time, right? When we think about memoir, we're not talking about capital T truth that is 100% factual and can be proven. Though, of course, if you're a memoirist, you want to do your research so that you make sure that you're writing in a fair and balanced way. But that what we're really looking at is, what is your emotional truth? Yeah, as you're writing, you are changing your memory. Just the fact that you're writing. And I will sometimes encounter memoirists who are like, well, but maybe it's not good to write about my memories because it's going to change the memory. But when you're thinking about trying to come to an emotional truth, and especially an emotional truth that integrates and settles something inside your body, which is what I feel is the power and the magic, both for you as the writer, but also for your reader, that's a wonderful thing. I also love that you pointed out that our understanding of the brain and our understanding of the memory is impacted by our understanding of science and some of the metaphors that we use to understand things. And I just want to add another layer, because I think it's part of the lexicon, or, the study for a lot of people who experience trauma, and that is the body keeps the score.
Yes.
And so right now, there's a lot of controversy around that. And some of that controversy, I believe, is around the person who wrote it, right? It's more about the character of the person, Bessel van der Kolk, than it is about the concepts. So I am curious to know what you think about that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to ramble, but I feel like this is also a piece of it. Is not just that this is a layer that we've added to our understanding, but, when it comes to recovered memories, which you talk about as reconstituted memories, that's a concept I really love. Some people will say that your memories cannot be stored in your body, that if you don't remember it, it's not actually inside you. And I take issue with that.
I agree with you. Yeah, I don't think that that's true at all. And look, Bessel van der Kolk, like most people, has some baggage. I don't know enough about his baggage to
Yeah.
feel qualified to comment on it, but the book, when it came out and for a decade after, has been groundbreaking.
Yes.
And it has changed how people think about their trauma. And I think that in and of itself is really helpful. Anything else? I don't think we should slam the work. I mean, granted, like I said, I don't know what the baggage is, so I don't know. But, straight white man in psychiatry for 30 years at Harvard, like, yeah, I'm sure there's something. So fine. But just the idea, and, pairing it with work of other people like Dan Siegel and, Peter Levine, like other people who have done work on what it means to be present in the body, you can't undo the impact that has had, and the impact has been good. And so I do think that we store things in our body in ways that science hasn't figured out how to explain to us yet. And I think it's that simple. I myself had an experience that I can't explain any other way. I had a very serious health issue. I had one of my ovaries rupture when I was 26 and had terrible consequences for several years after that, hormonal and weight gain and not having a period. And so after years of trying to figure this out and not having had a period for a year, nobody was able to help me. And one of my doctors was like, why don't you try acupuncture? Because nothing else is working. And the next step would be like coring out pieces of your ovaries. And I don't want to go to that step. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I agree. I don't want to do that either. So I found this acupuncture doctor in New Orleans, and acupuncture was not popular at the time. It was pretty really off the beaten path. And he put the needles in all the places that you put the needles in. And he told me, like, I can help you, but it's going to take several, like, you might be here for weeks, several times a week. I was like, okay, at this point, I just need to feel better. And on the third treatment, he put a needle. So I had the ovary that ruptured was on the right side. He put a needle on the left side, right over my left ovary. And I already had needles all over my body. And when he put this one in, I had this unbelievable experience of all of the memories of every bad sexual experience, every bad relationship, every betrayal that was romantic in nature just downloaded into my consciousness all at once like a rush. And my body was crying before I realized I was crying.
Wow.
And I had a period the next day, and I had not had a period in a year. So was the memory in the body? I don't know. Was the memory triggered by an energetic something that he touched with his needle? I don't know. We're understanding now that there's a whole lymph network in our body that we've never seen before, that we know nothing about. Is that connected somehow? I don't know. But I do know that science is not sophisticated enough to describe what a lot of our experiences are. And that's good enough for me. I believe that the memory is in the body, or it implicates the body. I don't think the body is separate from the brain and the mind. I've seen it firsthand with my own experience in that, but also in therapy with people and in doing the kind of therapy I do and watching people when they are in need to move some part of their body when they remember something and then they feel better.
I'm right there with you. I've had very similar experiences. And what I also think about is the book, What Happened to Me. The name of the author is escaping me at the moment. I know it's Oprah Winfrey and someone else, and I will put it in the show notes for everyone so that you'll have it. But I think that's one of the best explanations of what happens when trauma occurs. And so much of it is it's like input from the environment hits the brainstem, and then all of these physiological responses happen in the body before you have a chance to even understand, oh my gosh, I'm having a fear response or a trauma response. Like that's the last thing.
Well, and it has to be because of the way the brain works, right? Like, so one of the things that's happening in trauma is because if you think about a brain, right? Like, so this is a brain, right? This is your spinal cord here. This is the cerebellum down here. And this is like the midbrain. And this is the forebrain where your cognitive processes are. And if the signal's coming up this way, it doesn't have time to get all the way here for you to decide what to do. It activates the cerebellum, so it gets all of your physical, like all the body stuff going. It goes to the motor and visual cortex. It goes to the auditory and olfactory parts of your brain so that you have all of the data you need to move now. You can figure it out later. That's this part up here. It's the signal has to get all the way here. It doesn't have time to go here and then back.
Right.
So we respond immediately based on the pathway of the signal itself. And when trauma is occurring or when something really frightening is occurring, the body or the brain has a system to shut down that access to that frontal cortex so that the majority of what is happening at the level of the amygdala, posterior cingulate cortex, which is the very first part getting into the forebrain, and all of the kind of midbrain stuff, parietal lobe and amygdala, hippocampus, like all the pieces that are needed just to get you moving, just to have the most efficient way of dealing with what's happening to you. And then if the trauma is really bad, it'll block it completely so that the memory is not stored in a narrative way.
Yes.
The memory is stored in the pieces that have just happened to you. So the movement gets stored in the motor cortex. The olfactory gets stored in the olfactory area of the brain. The hippocampus puts just the location data, right, of what's happening into the PCC. And all of that gets separated. That's what happens in PTSD. So when the stimulus is repeated, all of those multiple areas light up, And the person has little to no conscious awareness of what's happening because there's no narrative. There's just experience. And that feels like it's happening again. And different treatment modalities like EMDR, brain spotting can help move it into the forebrain, into the frontal cortex. But for the most part, the brain is brilliant and efficient and keeps us alive and keeps us sane by not forcing us in the moment to get a narrative out of something that could kill us.
Yeah, so we need these instantaneous reactions in order to survive. And yet, because that's the case, and the way it was once explained to me is that there's actually a gate somewhere in, I don't know if it's the amygdala.
The gate is called a hippocampal bypass.
And then we lose that. That's why people will say things like, I was so angry or so frightened, I couldn't think of what to do next. It's like you just have that reaction time. And so you did a beautiful job of explaining what happens when we experience trauma and why our memories are so fractured. So that's one of the reasons why traumatic memories can be so disconcerting, is that there is no story, right? We just have these disparate pieces, and it can be crazy making for people, and it makes them question their own experiences. So I think that what I'm going to do is go to that question first, and then we'll talk about how memory is normally stored. So that what do we do when we have a narrative versus what do we do when we don't? And so, listeners, if you have had a traumatic memory and you're trying to write about it and you're feeling like I've got this piece and that piece, but I don't really know what it means, Stacy, can you help us understand what can we do, both in terms of therapeutic modalities, perhaps, or just in part of the writing, to create the narrative that around these fractured pieces in a way that is supportive and healthy? Because I'll just share this, is that I've told people time and again, just writing about something that's super upsetting or traumatic is not necessarily going to benefit you. If you do not make new meaning from the experience, you can actually re traumatize yourself. And then you get stuck in this trauma loop that gets reinforced in the brain.
Yes, absolutely. The avoidance of re-traumatization, I am so glad that you teach that because it's such an important piece of keeping people healthy.
Yes.
One of the hardest things in being a therapist and a writer, honestly, is that people think that if they just uncover the thing, that they're
Yeah.
going to be healed. I have a client who is one of my oldest and most dear clients, and she had horrible sexual trauma growing up. We worked and worked and worked for years on her having the resilience and strength and ego strength to tell her family that if they continued to associate with her abuser, she was not going to participate anymore. And I kept warning her, they are not going to be your champions.
Yeah.
When you do this, this is going to have ripple effects and there will be additional trauma. And she was like, no, they're going to be great. Like, just didn't believe it. It happened, unfortunately, in a very similar way that I expected. And she was devastated because she had worked up so much effort to believe that everybody was going to rally around her for her strength and her resilience. It's like, no, you're pointing out the monster in their midst. You're traumatizing them. Not that they shouldn't be. They should confront that, right? And I think this same thing happens when we talk about like unveiling a trauma or having, the expectation that if I just do this work, then
Yes.
the meaning will be automatic. And it's like, no, the meaning still has to be made. You still have to give it meaning. So with that in mind, like talking about what do we do? So the first part is I obviously am a therapist. I think therapy is almost always helpful. EMDR I find to be very helpful. Brain spotting I find to be very helpful. Things like somatic experiencing can be helpful. I find that sometimes it can be too much. It can be too intense for people sometimes. Not that there's not great healing that happens there. I'm not saying that. Just that, maybe too much for some folks. So those are good. I would say writing about things, but not trying to write from a Dear Diary, this is what happened to me point of view, right? Instead, come at it from an angle. I'm going to use a car accident because it's fairly neutral, right? But let's say you had a car accident and you remember being in the car before the fire department came. See if you can ask the question of yourself, what would I see from the outside? If I were an observer, what do I think I would have seen from the outside? And then ask yourself, what would I hope I would have seen from the outside?
Yes.
The two things will help you understand your need to understand that event. What did I want people to do, and what did I experience in the doing? And if you can get there, I think you can get to the next place that helps you heal, which is, was it enough?
Yes.
And that's hard. Sometimes the answer is no, but then you'll know why, and you can unpack that.
I love that, and that aligns so beautifully with some of the things that I teach people, because the first thing I tell everyone is you need to understand your resources, right?
Mhm.
You know, we think about EMDR, the first step of EMDR is resourcing, helping someone feel safe. And so not diving into the deep end of whatever your traumas are is really important. Dip your toe in the water of the storytelling with something that is more neutral, has less charge, because that will be really helpful. And so in terms that writers might understand that one part of like, what did you hope happened? And I get people to write that. Write a speculative scene as if you got everything that you needed and just notice what that's like, because that alone can be very healing. But I love what you said about also step back. And an exercise I will give people is write this in the third person as if you are the director observing what's happening versus the person who is in the car experiencing it. And that can teach you a lot, regardless of what point of view you decide to write, because that is part of the integration process is understanding what happened, what did you need to happen, and then that third part, which that is where the sting is. And that is the reason why resourcing is so important, because when you confront what you didn't get, you have to have the resources in place already to deal with the fact that you will be destabilized. You will be questioning everything for a period of time, and you will have to feel deep and sometimes very painful feelings in order to get to the other side. It's very much that going through, you have to.
It's grief. And, we are taught in our culture that grief is something that is for when someone dies. It's not for the loss of a capacity or an option or an ability or a hope. But it is. I mean, that grief is appropriate for all of those things. And to be able to sit with grief is, in my opinion, it's the most important skill we learn as writers, because it means that I can tell my story in an unsentimental way
Yes.
without an expectation that you validate me. And if I can do that, then I'm really writing something, right? Because I'm not looking for you to tell me that it's good. I'm not looking for you to tell me that it's right. I'm not looking for you to say, yes, those are the facts. I'm just telling you, this is my experience. And whether you like it or not, whether you agree or not, this is how it affected me. And that gives other people permission to say the same thing.
I love that. And I'm going to restate something you said for everyone because it's so, so important. You know that your book is done. You know that you're ready to send this out when you can tell your story without expectation of validation, that you do not need something from your reader or from the world. You can just own your truth and you share it as a form of experience, strength, and hope. And then people will get out of it whatever they need.
It's not yours anymore. Once it's in
Yeah.
the book, it's not yours. And it's so hard because people, they want to be understood. They want to make a difference in other people's lives, and they want their story to be validated. Even if it gets into every person you love's hands and they read it, they're all going to take something different away from it.
Yes.
And that's okay. It's what writing is for, because your book is now theirs. It's their version merging with yours, and it's no longer a singular thing.
And that truly is the gift of storytelling. And I love how we've gone down this rabbit hole to think about traumatic memories, what we can do with them in order to create integration, which I think is the most important step. So we have that work, but then there are the things that we remember and that we have narratives around them. How are those memories stored just at a high level? Because I know we could go down the deep rabbit holes because you did in your book and in your other book, which I loved. And we're going to get into that. But what do we need to know about how those are stored so that we can work with them?
Well, I mean, so there's a short-term memory and there's long-term memory, right? Long-term memory, it's stored by repetition. So what happens is The more you hear the story, the more you tell the story, that is what creates, like, it's almost like adding bricks to a wall, or, one time you tell the story's brick, the second time is another brick, third time is another brick. And the more bricks you have and the more similar color they are, you get the kind of tone of the story, right? And if somebody comes in and they try to smash your story, it's hard to take the wall down, because it's the more repeated it is, the more kind of singular and strong it is in your memory. It's going to have pieces that are not just the images and the narrative itself, but it's going to have the tone, it's going to have the feeling, have the season, it's going to have the smells. Like, the thing that really got me like crazy about neuroscience was that the hippocampus, where the hippocampus sits in the brain, is right next to the olfactory bulb, which is right next to the amygdala. They all kind of sit in this little bitty part in the very middle of your skull, like right here behind your ears. And that means that smell and memory and emotion and fear are all the most tightly connected in your brain. So when you smell, if you had gotten abused by your dad every time he cut the grass, you smell fresh cut grass, you want to run. That's why, because all of those things are so tightly connected, and the memory gets formed and stored so close to all of those pieces of your brain. So to think of memory, the more repetitive a story is, the more concrete the memory will feel. If it's a story you don't tell yourself, if it's a story that nobody wants to talk about, then it's also going to have a tone of shame with that memory. And the more you repeat it internally, you have to be really cognizant of what else is being repeated in your internal memory creation, right? Like, if you're perseverating on something and ruminating on something, and it always has this tone of shame or always has a tone of anger, then it's going to be really hard to separate that in the writing or in the retrieval of the memory. So the kinds of exercises you're talking about become really important. Like, how do you third person this? How do you take the 30,000 foot view? How do you think about it if you're looking at it through a telescope on a mountaintop far away? So the long-term memory is stored that way, but it's also really important, I think, for people to think about, if you have a memory of something that you have not looked at for a long time. Let me go back and talk a little bit about developmental psychology. So the brain, we don't have good hippocampal structure, which the hippocampus is necessary for the creation of memory. If your hippocampus doesn't work properly, or you have damage to it, or you have stroke to it, the capacity to create memory goes away. Children, their hippocampus is not fully online until they're about 7 years old. And so I have clients all the time who will come in and be like, "Oh my God, Dr. Simmons, I can't remember my childhood. Did something horrible happen?" It's like, no, you're a human. Your hippocampus probably, like most humans, was not fully online until you're 7. Well, I remember something from when I was 5. Yes, but do you remember everything from when you were 5? And so memory before like 7 years old usually is stored because it is highly charged. Fear, joy, delight, anger, it kind of forces that memory through the hippocampus and into the frontal lobe. So if you have a memory from early life, and that means after 7 too, but if you have a memory from early life where you're not sure about it, but it's a sensation, trust it. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to understand the objective facts of what happened. But for example, you might have a memory from being a little kid of having an experience, and it might have been with an imaginary friend, or it might have been with your deceased relative or something. You don't have to treat that like it's not real. It doesn't matter how your brain made sense of what was happening. What matters is that you have the memory of the experience, and the sensation of what it prompted in you and what came forward in you is what matters, not the objective truth of, was there really a ghost in the house? Yeah. Or did my relative really hurt me? Or did, XYZ really happen to me? Like, it doesn't matter if it happened in the way that you want to remember it versus the way you feel it, because how you feel it is the truth. And the little kid brain did not have language or structure, neural structure, to give it the kind of meaning that you would give it as an adult. So if the memory is that there were monsters in my house, and every 2 weeks the monsters would disappear, and when they'd come back, they'd eat me. Yeah, that really happened. Now, were they monsters? Don't know. They were monstrous. Did they eat you? Probably not. You're still here. Did they fundamentally hurt you in some way? Clearly.
Yeah.
Right. So the brain is going to give you symbolism when it can't fill in with facts. And that is just as valid as the objective reality.
Yeah, and I love how you shared that because I think for writers, like this example of the monsters, if it felt like there were monsters in your house, you could potentially write a speculative piece about what it was like to live in a house with monsters. And you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, is this like factually true? What do you remember? What was the feeling tone? What was that experience? And then from a metaphorical place, even you can begin to say, now, what sense do I want to make from it? And what can I do with the hurt and the pain? Because that's what really matters, or the joy. And that doesn't always have to be hurt and pain, it can also be the joy. I mean, I'm curious about when we think about memories before the age of 7 and before the hippocampus is generally fully online. I have some clients that I've worked with, and I also happen to be a person. I have not been diagnosed with hyperthymesia. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. That's where you have unusual accurate recall of like your whole life and specifically, your early life. And so, I am a trauma survivor. I have an ACEs score of 9 out of 10. I don't need to say any more, right? You don't need to know the stories. That's enough. Listeners, if you're like, what does that mean? You can look it up. That's my experience, and that begins very early. My first memories were when I was 18 months old. I said my first word at 6 months. I was speaking in sentences by 9 months old and very intelligibly at the age of 1. So that's extremely unusual, but like my memories are not always just the traumatic memories. I can tell you about playing when I was very, very young in my room by myself. Like, so that's what I really look at as the memories where I'm by myself. I can fully describe rooms in my grandmother's house and say, did they have this lamp? Did they do this? And it's mine. It's not something that was told to me, which I'm always careful about because when you think about early memory, there's also what people tell and that how that gets layered on, even to the point where my grandparents took me to see The Rescuers when I was 3 years old. I loved that movie, and I'm sure that there is, like, something about that that is a piece of this, but I remembered seeing the beginning of Star Wars as we were leaving the drive-in. I was like, "I have this memory of seeing the Star," and nobody in my family would have cared about that, certainly not my grandparents. They just said, "No, that's a movie for adults. You're not seeing it," even though I really, really wanted to see Star Wars because 'cause I'd seen the commercials. So I looked it up, and sure enough, in 19, I believe, 77, which is when this took place, Star Wars and The Rescuers were playing at the drive-in. So, like, this was, like, legit. So for those of us who have this experience, I'm thinking of very specific people that I've talked to about this. What do we do with those kinds of memories? Can we trust the accuracy of that?
Trust them. Absolutely trust them. I mean, it's really interesting because you have all this other correlating data that says that you should trust it, right? Like you're talking early, so that means that you had good recall even then because word finding is a whole other form of memory. So if you were able to find words at 9 months old, at a year old, and be able to reproduce them, that means that all of that internal structure was there. So I would say that's correlative to giving you some reason to have faith in those memories. Like, and you know what? Like, if down the line you find that you were off by, oh, it wasn't when we went to go see The Rescuers, it was when we went to go see, Digby the giant dog. Like, well, okay. Like,
Right.
just because the memories are clustered together doesn't mean that they're not true.
Right. And I love how you just said they're clustered together
Mhm.
because when we're thinking about memory and storytelling, some things will be clustered together either because of the emotional tenor they all have, just what was important at the time or how they got stored. So it's really important to be curious about memories and to really understand that memory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is a story that we're telling ourselves.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's exactly what memory is. It is almost always the story we're telling ourselves. And so, it's one of the reasons why it's so dangerous when you're either in a relationship with somebody who wants to control the narrative or in a political situation we find ourselves in now where the system is trying to control the narrative. It's like, no, no, trust your eyes, write it down. I was talking to some college students not too long ago, and they were rightly asking questions about like, what do writers do? I'm like, keep a journal. And it doesn't have to be, dear diary, I saw this today. It can be like, this is what my day was today. It's important because when this moment, whether you write about it later or it's a historical moment, it's going to matter.
Yes.
And capturing the experience, that's the writer's job. So journal, journal, journal.
And some things I will add as someone who can be a little scattered sometimes if you can, try to have one journal, date your entries if you think about it. And what I've learned to do, and I'll actually just get it out now because this is part of my practice and I want people to see it, is that I have these journals that I'm working on. And a friend of mine, Katie Rose Guest Prile, shout out to you, I put in the date. Like this journal is from this date to this date. And then when I go back, I can figure it out. Because I'll just be honest and say, like, sometimes I just need to write and I'm just picking up any notebook. It's just how I roll. But I do have some that I have actually dated, and that's been very helpful. So we've talked about the things that we can get access to, right? And how that works. But I want to wrap up by talking about reconstituted memories. Those memories where maybe you have a sense that there's something there, or maybe you don't. And then suddenly it comes into awareness. And I think the conversation that people have around it is around recovered memories. So that's the language you may find out in the world if you start studying this or looking into it. Can you explain to us what we would need to know about these reconstituted memories and what we can do with them if we happen to be people who that's part of our story or part of our experience?
I want to be very respectful of this because I think it's really critical to treat the idea of a reconstituted or recovered memory with as much delicacy as possible. Because memory is so plastic, the implication, if you are not respectful of memory, is to be able to just say, didn't happen, right? Or that's not a thing. It's like, no, we don't get to do that. But we do have to look at the processes and, to kind of go back and reconnect all the dots of the things we've talked about today. Your memory, especially a reconstituted memory, is going to take pieces of data, visual, motor, auditory, feeling, like somatic, sensational, like it's going to take all of it and try to make it make sense for you. And it's really important to hold that tenderly and to not hold it like it's with the kung fu grip, right? Like it's like you're holding a bird, or a hummingbird or something. Like you need it to heal while it's in your hand. You need to not crush it. And also be careful that it, you don't have to put it in a cage either. Like it's fluid. So I did my PhD in social psychology, and I looked at witch hunts, modern day witch hunts. And one of the ones I studied was the McMartin preschool case, which was a satanic panic case in Manhattan Beach, California in the 80s.
I remember that.
And the case was very important from a legal perspective because the whole thing is about memory. There was a single mom who had mental health issues, who had a small child that she put in the care of the McMartin preschool. A single mom in the 80s with not a lot of resources. We're not going to fault her for being worried about her kid, right?
Sure.
But she brought her baby, who was 3, into the emergency room because he had a diaper rash. And she started asking the emergency room doctor, could he have been molested? And the doctor was like, looks like diaper rash, but I guess. And then this person who was not a stable person started telling all the other parents that her son was being abused by the people at the preschool. And then that started other parents freaking out because the McMartin's oldest son had lost his job and he was living in Colorado or something, came back to Manhattan Beach, and he was working in the school. And so rather than see him as the child of these parents who were just trying to help their kid, they saw him as, why would a 20-something-year-old man be working in a preschool? And so it started this whole thing. And then to add to it, when the children started to be interviewed, they were interviewed by child psychologists who had a particular religious orientation, all connected through this one organization. And they had a vested interest in there being something evil that could validate their point of view. They created memories for these children. And it's in all the tapes. Like if you watch the interrogations, it's plain. And after that case, there's all these changes to the law. But the sad thing for me is that all of the children, or a good proportion of the children, even into 20 years later, still believed that they were molested by McMartins in a satanic ritual.
Yeah.
And there's travesty on the other side too. The guy went to jail, never was charged. He was in jail for 5 years with no charges. He sued LA County and won. Like he went to law school. But the harder thing is, tens of children, like 40 children who were led through this process, believing to this day that they were molested and abused. because some therapists put it in their heads that they were. So I say all that to try and ask people to, when you have a recovered memory, think about it like, what are the pieces that you want to validate? Because a reconstituted memory to me is slightly different from a recovered memory. A recovered memory can be placed there because the context is given to you. A reconstituted memory is likely coming out of your own psyche, out of your own experience, out of your own symbol making, out of your own meaning making. And trusting that that is a reconstituted process to say, I don't need to know that the narrative itself is true to know that the experience is true.
Yes.
That to me is very different than, I was with this whole group of people and we all had the same experience and we all, no, you've told yourself the same story for however many
Yes.
years, times, etc. And that's fine, but separate them out. What is your lived experience and what are the pieces and how did you reconnect with those experiences and pieces? What moved in you when you felt it? What meaning are you questioning in order to give the meaning? That to me is going to validate that reconstituted memory in a way that's very different than a recovered memory.
I also love that you touch on the big controversy around recovered memories. And in the 1980s, I think you point to a very specific case, which is a great example. But there are other cases where therapists have implanted memories, whether they meant to or not, just by the kinds of questions they asked and the ways they asked them, that gave people a sense that they were abused when maybe they weren't. And so, yeah, we want to always believe victims. And also, I think what's one of the responsibilities, and this was part of my training, is to not implant ideas in victims, right? So, and we also want to not inadvertently implant ideas in ourselves. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of different things in the way that I'm processing all of this beautiful information that you shared. Did you watch or listen to Hysterical? It's a podcast. It's wonderful. I'm going to put it in the show notes and it's really well done. And it's about this hysteria that happened in this town in upstate New York. And it really questions the whole idea of memory. And it's really about this concept of hysteria that can be contagious, like hysteria as a contagion, which is a real thing.
Very real thing.
And then the question of this podcast is, was there really some sort of contamination at this school that created this mystery illness that could not really be diagnosed? Or was it a hysteria? They don't really answer the question, but they provide the evidence. And that's what I really love about it. So these things can happen. We can have these hysterias that can be a contagion in our memories and in our lives. And then on the flip side, our brains crave narrative so much so that in the middle of an experience, we will create one. And an experience that I had, this was back in 2012, there was a relatively powerful earthquake here in Virginia. Powerful for us. It was in the fives. It wasn't like,
Big earthquake.
oh, it
Yeah.
was. Then
Yeah.
at the epicenter, it caused massive damage. And I happened to be at this outdoor cafe with a friend, and I hear the sound that sounded like a really loud truck rumbling down the road. And of course, I could feel the vibration. Immediately, my mind is like, "What's going on with that truck? What's happening with this truck?" So my mind is like grabbing the data and creating the story about some runaway truck that is out on this road nearby. And then I realized that the table is shaking and the windows are rattling at the building across. And then suddenly it makes sense to me that no, I'm in the middle of an earthquake. So that was such a powerful teacher for me at how we're constantly trying to make sense. And some of the ways that we make sense of what's happening is inaccurate.
Yes. It's based on the data sets that we have available to us.
Exactly. And so I have a pretty powerful reconstituted memory. I know it is mine. I'm not going to talk about what it is on here because it's not necessary. And also, it's part of this book I'm writing. But even in the book, I'm careful with it because there are pieces that I know and pieces that I don't know. And there's what I suspect is the truth. But also, I am very sensitive to the fact that I can never fully know the truth because it's just not knowable. And so, what do I do with that? That's the whole story that I take people on.
I would ask you to trust it.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, so I'm saying that because I want to make sure that me, as the person coming on here and talking about memory, right, that I'm also, I don't want to give the impression that we should never trust memory, right? Like, there's two stories I want to share about that, and they're both older psychology stories. You probably encountered them in your training. So the first is, one of my favorites is one of the fathers of modern psychology, Genet, who was working in France in the 1800s. And he had a patient who, he's a psychiatrist, he was working in the Salpêtrière in hospital in Paris. And he had a patient who had full amnesia of her life. She didn't really know anything about her life. And every day he would see her, and every day he'd have to reintroduce himself to her. But she knew the layout of the hospital. She knew the times for dinner. She knew where her room was. Like, so she knew things. She wasn't gone from the world, but she didn't remember who she was, and she didn't have any other context. And so one day he did a test, and he went to, because he had to introduce himself every day to her, and he put a little pin, like a little straight pin, in his hand, and he shook her hand, and it pinched her hand back. The next day she would not shake his hand. So she didn't remember who he was. She didn't remember why he was there, but she knew not to touch his hand. Something is being processed at the level of the unconscious that is important and valuable and gives us enough context to keep us safe. So that's the first one. The other one is almost counterpoint. Freud, when he was training with Genet, was sent to Salpêtrière in Paris, and he was trying out his talking cure, where he was talking to the women patients instead of just treating them with medicine or looking at their. And to a woman, because they were all women, told him about sexual abuse, usually at the hands of brothers, fathers, uncles, important people. This was not a hospital for poor people. This was a hospital for wealthy people. So all these, the best families in Europe, all these women talking about sexual abuse. And Freud was so distraught by the idea that all of these people he knew, and people of whom he knew and had respect for, could do such a thing, that he decided that it was actually a delusion. It wasn't possible for this many people, this many women, to have been so horribly abused by the men of society. And so he told himself that it was not true, and made sure that it was part of his theory that when women are mentally ill, sometimes they will sexualize their mental illness. And it became fundamental to his own theorizing because he was so disturbed by the idea that it could be possible. So I say that to say two things, right? Like, there are powerful forces in the people around us who will violently choose to turn their backs on our lived experience because it doesn't fit their worldview.
Yes.
And we need to be prepared for that. And we need to also think about it when we're reading other people's stories.
Yeah.
Those two kind of in opposition to each other in a way, but trying to make the point that memory is so controversial.
Yeah.
That to treat it like it should just be, oh, it's just what I remember. Like, no, it's powerful. Treating it with what's the adage? Not fragile like a flower, fragile like a bomb. That's memory.
And that is a gorgeous metaphor for us to end on. Fragile like a bomb. And that is memory. So thank you so much for this enriching, enlivening, and just really important conversation around memory. I am so grateful to you, and just thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's always fun to talk to you. We have such great conversations. I could be here for the next 3 hours and just be, soaking it up. So thanks.
Me as well. And listeners, just be aware that there will be one more conversation with Stacy where we are going to dive into psychedelics. So until next time, stay tuned, and thank you again, Stacy, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Stacy, and most importantly, buy copies of The Queen's Path and Mushroom Pharmacy, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube with the answer to the following question. What's one thing you learned about memory, or one way you're trusting your memories more after listening to this episode? I would love to hear your answers. And speaking of your answers and feedback to the podcast, I would love to give a quick shout out to Krista Hillhouse, Stephanie Shaffron, Shannon's Channel, Lee Page, and Heather Fries for your insightful responses to my recent episodes with Wendy Dale and Melissa Fraderico. It was so wonderful to hear from you. And listeners, if you haven't reached out to the show, I would love to hear from you too. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.